You know that prescription you just picked up? Well, its origins go back, way back, over 1,000 years, to a scientific revolution that honestly, you've probably never even heard of. Today, we're exploring how scholars in the medieval Islamic world didn't just discover new medicines, they literally invented the whole idea of modern pharmacy. Okay, just look at this contrast. It's night and day, right? On the one side, you've got medicine as a kind of art based on tradition, and on the other, boom, it's a regulated science. Now, this wasn't some slow, gradual evolution. This was a fundamental reinvention. So what was the catalyst for this incredible leap? Well, the answer is found in a golden age of scientific inquiry. So, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll see how pharmacy split off and became its own thing. Then, we'll dive into the golden age that made it all possible. After that, we're going to break down the 5 absolute game-changing contributions that still shape our world, meet some of the brilliant minds behind them, and finally connect it all back to the pharmacy you go to down the street. All right, let's rewind the clock for a minute. For most of human history, the doctor and the pharmacist, they were the exact same person. The one who diagnosed you was the same one who would then go mix up a bunch of herbs and remedies to treat you. It was all one single craft. The historian Ibn Khaldun really hit the nail on the head. He said that before this big shift, medicine was all about limited experience, not what he called natural law. Just think about what that really means. There were no universal standards, no rigorous testing, just, local traditions passed down from one generation to the next. So, what lit the fuse? It was the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate back in the 8th century. The rulers, the caliphs, they poured a ton of resources into science. They funded translations of ancient texts and built these amazing centers of learning. And this wasn't just about hoarding old knowledge. It was about creating a brand new ecosystem for discovery. And you can really see the explosive growth right here on this timeline. In the 8th century, you get that initial spark from the top. Then, by the 9th, the very first pharmacy schools start popping up in huge cities like Baghdad. And just 100 years later, professional pharmacies are a standard feature in the most advanced hospitals. I mean, the pace of change was just incredible. And those advanced hospitals were called bimaristans. But you gotta understand, these were so much more than just places for sick people. They were basically the research universities of their time. They had massive libraries, classrooms, and, this is the key part, fully stocked pharmacies that gave out medicine to patients, a lot of the time for free. They were true engines of medical progress. So what was actually coming out of these incredible new schools and bimaristans? Well, the breakthroughs can pretty much be boiled down to 5 revolutionary ideas, the actual pillars that hold up modern pharmacy as we know it today. And here they are. We're going to see how they split the jobs of doctor and pharmacist, how they created the first ever government regulations, how they brought chemistry into medicine, turned old school herbalism into a real science, and maybe the biggest one of all, how they pioneered the experimental method. Let's break them down one by one. First up, and this was a huge deal, they separated the 2 professions. New laws actually made it illegal for a doctor to own a pharmacy or to make a profit from selling drugs. Their job was just diagnosis, and the pharmacist's job, preparing and handing out the medicine. This created specialists and, for the first time ever, a real system of checks and balances to keep patients safe. Second, they built a whole system of regulation from the ground up. All of a sudden, you needed a written prescription. There was a government inspector, the muhtasib, who would actually go and check pharmacies for quality. Prices were fixed so people wouldn't get ripped off. And get this, to even become a pharmacist, you had to pass an exam and get a license. This wasn't just red tape. This was the birth of patient safety. Number 3, they merged pharmacy with chemistry. Pioneers like Al-Razi started using chemical processes, things like distillation and crystallization, directly on medicines. They figured out how to make bitter drugs taste better, how to help them dissolve in the body more easily, and they even invented the first coated pills. This wasn't just about making medicine less gross, it was about making it actually work better. Fourth, they took herbalism and turned it into the science of botany. They moved way beyond folklore and started systematically documenting all the medicinal plants. They wrote down super precise descriptions, detailed the exact right way to collect them to get the most potency, and figured out specific dosages. A plant wasn't just a plant anymore. It was a predictable, reliable medicine. And finally, the 5th and, you could argue, the most revolutionary pillar of all, the experimental method. Thinkers like even Sina laid out a process that sounds, well, stunningly modern. First, you test a new drug on animals. If it works, then you can try it on people, but under controlled conditions. And then, and this is so important, you have to watch what happens over time to make sure it's safe. That is literally the blueprint for modern clinical trials, written 1,000 years ago. Okay, so we've seen the what, but what about the who? Who were these brilliant people behind all these breakthroughs? Let's meet a few of the architects of this brand new science. First up is al-Zahrawi. He's often called the father of modern surgery, but his mind-blowing 30-volume encyclopedia al-Tashrif shows his genius went way beyond that, deep into pharmacy. It was a complete A to Z guide for preparing complex medicines, ointments, and even detailed what patients should eat. He saw the body as one big interconnected system. Next, you have Ibn al-Baytar, who was, without a doubt, the master of botany. This guy was a true field researcher. He spent years traveling all over the known world just to collect and identify plants with his own 2 eyes. His masterpiece, Al-Jami, became the ultimate botanical encyclopedia, blending all the ancient knowledge with his own groundbreaking discoveries. Okay, now look at this number, over 1,700. What in the world does that have to do with pharmacy 1,000 years ago? Well, that's how many individual drugs were described by Dawud al-Antaki. His book was this masterclass in organization, an encyclopedia of over 1,700 drugs from plants, animals, and minerals, all ordered alphabetically. It detailed exactly what they did, the rules for making them, and what diseases they could treat. He didn't just collect information, he made it usable. So when you put all of this together, it becomes so clear that these contributions aren't just some dusty old historical facts. They form a direct line to the world we live in right now, creating a legacy that affects our health every single day. The journey was just immense. It took pharmacy from this world of chaotic, passed-down traditions and completely transformed it into a regulated, evidence-based, and totally distinct scientific discipline. And you know what's wild? The proof is right there in your hand every time you get a prescription filled. I mean, really think about it. The separation of the doctor who diagnoses from the pharmacist who dispenses. The written prescription itself, the government regulation making sure the drug is safe, the scientific testing that proved it even works. Every single one of those steps is a direct echo of the pillars they put in place more than 1,000 years ago. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? So many of the foundations of our modern world are built in times and places we just don't really study. Which brings up one final question. What other incredible scientific stories are just sitting there in the pages of history, waiting to be told? Thanks for watching.